Saint Bede in the 7th century compared life, our life, to a sparrow's brief flight through a lit banquet hall, one window to another, darkness to darkness. And because I tend to forget this, the giftedness of it all, and the luck of its beauty, because I forget that I have agency and obligations, because it seems so easy sometimes to be defeated by the ache of it all, I've written 6 letters, possibly love letters because I'm safe behind this screen. 6 letters to me and to you. Letter number 1, matter. More and more I'm struck by our matter. Literally, I guess, photons bouncing off you, the screen, the blossom outside, bombarded all the time. But I mean, of course, I'm taken with it. This stuff of us. I'm obsessed increasingly. I notice it at work, in the ward, in clinic, in certain lights, the texture of our bodies and our skin, its likeness to a ploughed field or algae on a rock, a puddle thick with mud, clay. I do wonder now if this is how artists might see us. Painters like Caravaggio or Rembrandt, their human shapes on paper flecked and creased with life and the grain of earth, how they resemble us, and how they assemble us, entirely from pigment. Pigment which is, of course, itself rock. And it's not just the sight of us, but the touch too. Take that magnolia tree opening now outside our hospital, how its buds in January were like rough flesh, a wet wound or moth wings. The thing I'm struck by, of course, is more than just a likeness. It's that I am this stuff, that there's no more to me than the world's matter. That, as Tim D writes, we are grass. And Henry Marsh, mid-neurosurgery, describes exactly this epiphany, that what he's cutting through is thought, emotion, reason, that memories, dreams, and reflections consist simply and entirely of jelly. That, as Annie Dillard writes, we are a pucker of the earth's skin, that we arise like budding yeasts and we break off. Letter number 2, life. Matter, then, continuous with matter, matter continuous with life. A virus shouts this out. A pandemic shouted it, and had we not been deafened by ourselves, we'd have heard it. A virus's ability to replicate its life is entirely dependent on a host, on other life. So is it alive, or not alive, or maybe a bit alive? Paul Nurse, a biologist, just cautions us here. He reminds us of our own dependence, each of us, on and our continuity with other life, that the 30 million cells that build me are outnumbered by my other cells of bacteria, fungi, mites, worms, that they live within and permit my body, they hold me together, whatever I may be. I remember that photograph last week in the paper of a sloth hung from a tree and indistinguishable from it, both of them green with the same moss. The sloth and I, both mosaics, assembled from the world, neither of us discrete, neither of us an island, as John Donne put it. The poets and artists know this so well. In Ecclesiastes, we're reminded that we are all one breath. And Edvard Munch wrote, "From my rotting body, flowers will grow, and I am in them, and that is eternity." So letter number 3, fragility. My fixation, this fixation with matter, I can see it now, stems really from my encounters with death, or less with death, more with the dying, or, to be honest, not even really the dying, more with the living. the living who incline right here and now in front of me in a clinic at a bedside towards the dying. Someone I've come to know well, who I now understand won't be here in, say, 6 months. Yet, here they are, animated, a particular laugh, a gesture, a voice. So I find myself wondering at that transition from life to not life. And so I notice at the same time, and I'm gripped by the substance of these people sat so close to me, their construction, the audacity of it, these tendons, veins, pulses. And I think, really, what are the odds here? Clocking now that my fixation with matter is really an astonishment at life. And I think, all the while, the clinic's still running, who anyway are the dying? T.S. Eliot writes, "We who are living are now dying, with little patience," which is to say that the dying and the living are synchronous, continuous, all of us, all the while, weathering and simultaneously, astonishingly alive, from matter to life to matter, indistinct, blurry, mutable, dust-blown creatures, which is exactly where medicine finds us, in our short lives, our fragility, our finitude, and in our clear but always overlooked connectedness. Letter number 4. Medicine. What then is medicine's duty to life? Isn't that its central question? What's its responsibility to the living and the dying, this fraying matter? Whether to lengthen it, by how much, how best, at what cost, whether ever to shorten it? It's not a technical question, regardless of our extraordinary progress. It doesn't even feel to me like a straight moral question. It feels wider, much more nuanced. Medicine's contact with life feels fraught, ambivalent, almost a tussle. A tussle with what's hoped for, valued, believed in, feared. A tussle with meaning. And maybe, like religion and art, medicine is just another attempt to fathom life, suffering, and loss. And if that's true, how is it that we achieve such myopia, finding ourselves mechanically now challenging our inevitable mortality whilst ignoring so much suffering, immunotherapy in Cheltenham, no analgesia in Sudan, etc., or allocating treatments, say vaccines, to only some bodies and some geographies, administering harm, intended or collateral, onto other life, only to preserve our human ones, shedding all the while waste, gloves, plastics, aprons into an already scarred biosphere whose oceans, rising with our ascent, take from dinghies the bodies of those we choose to forget. The progress may be extraordinary, but by these lights it can feel quite insufficient. John Berger, in A Fortunate Man, writes about this. He says, "When we hear of doctors discovering a new cure, we acknowledge their achievement easily. It remains in the realm of progress, almost an abstraction. It's a different matter to imaginatively take the measure of a person doing no more or less than easing and occasionally saving the lives of thousands of contemporaries. I'd suggest one of the fundamental reasons," he goes on, "why so many doctors become cynical and disillusioned is precisely because when the abstract has worn thin, they're uncertain about the value of the lives they're treating, not because they're callous or inhuman, but because they live in and accept a society that's incapable of knowing what a human life is worth." What knowledge is this that Berger is asking of us? What imagination? Letter number 5. Knowledge. In Raymond Carver's poem, his doctor asks, "Do you kneel down in a forest groves and let yourself ask for help when you come to a waterfall, mist blowing against your face and arms? Do you stop to ask for understanding at those moments?" Understanding. This feels wider than knowledge, in the way that care is wider than treatment. But what understanding? Perhaps this, that we are connected, materially, as suggested, but also experientially, that I may not know what it is to be Mrs. Jones, but I do and ought to understand fear, hope, desire, loss, that my attention to this in others and in myself can shape how I feel and act, that because we're connected, medicine's obligation to life is wide, and because we are connected, life is precarious, dependent always on other life, that this calls for humility and reverence rather than entitlement, a recognition perhaps of medicine's limits, that knowledge too is limited, always provisional, that the world is never entirely knowable, still mysterious, that we are hurry, as Seamus Heaney writes, through which known and strange things pass. And letter number 6, enchantment. Art inhabits this space. Art insists on other ways of understanding the world, of mapping and navigating its realities. That a poet may reveal human truths as surely as a scalpel demonstrates the facial nerve course. Art insists alongside knowledge and fact that we imagine, and that by imagining we understand that we're plural, not discrete, porous to one another. Milosz writes, the purpose of poetry is to remind us how difficult it is to remain just one person, that we are unerringly flawed, capable always of great cruelty and great kindness. Art calls us to attend, in seeing these flaws, to the world and others. As Linda Lohman in Death of a Salesman shouts, he's a human being and a terrible thing is happening to him. Attention must be paid to such a person. Her calling for attention in this way reminds me of Martha Mill's mother, noting the different quality of attention in doctors towards her sick daughter and the consequences of a failure to attend well. The failure of attention equating to a failure of care. Annie Dillard again writing, the caring informs the tasks informs the schedules, the care, the attention always comes first. And the arts won't necessarily make us better people. There's plenty of evidence to the contrary there. Neither, of course, will science, but the arts can amplify and hone our attention, and in this way, they enlarge us. There is enchantment in this, that's my experience. Not only that we are somehow rescued through our heightened attention and gaze upon others and our obligation to them, but that the world is beautified. Wonder is both incited and delivered. So perhaps the arts have a place here in catalyzing this wonder and attention that is so necessary to medicine. And perhaps love, as also requisite for medicine, is only realized by really understanding our own brief lives within a continuum of other tenuous life and matter here in the spring light, where, as T.S. Eliot suggests, the whole earth is our hospital. Thank you all for listening.